heard her crying through the walls. A whisper followed. "I need you tonight." I froze. Should I knock? Should I leave? Her eyes met mine later. Fleeting, impossible to read. Every glance, every pause. It pulled me closer, though I knew I shouldn't. And that night, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about her. I never thought a night like this would catch me off guard. The repair shop was quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only company I had, until a sound cut through the stillness. A soft, almost muffled cry. At first, I froze, convinced I'd imagined it. Then a whisper, "I need you tonight." Her voice was steady, trembling just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't move immediately. Part of me wanted to knock, to ask if she was okay. Another part wanted to run, because the weight behind those words was something I wasn't ready for. I knew her, of course, everyone in the building did. She was the kind of woman you noticed without trying. Confident, layered, impossible to ignore. Mid-40s, tall enough to command attention even in a crowd, with eyes that had seen things she'd never speak aloud. She wasn't the sort to ask for help lightly. That much was obvious in the way she stood when she passed me in the hallway. Poised, contained, yet somehow exposed. I stepped closer to the door of the office, my hand hovering over the handle. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, floral but not overpowering, and something warmer underneath that made me aware of how close I was to crossing a line I didn't understand. She looked up at me when I entered, though she hadn't expected anyone. There was a pause, one of those long, suspended moments where nothing needs to be said, and yet everything is happening. Her lips pressed together, a shadow of a smile, or maybe hesitation. Couldn't tell. She gestured to the chair in front of her desk, her fingers brushing the surface as if grounding herself, and I sat, careful not to breathe too loudly. Her eyes kept finding mine, like magnetic pulses that neither of us acknowledged aloud. I noticed how her hands moved, deliberate, graceful, but betraying just enough tension that I knew she wasn't entirely okay. Her laugh, when she finally made it, was quiet, a soft release that barely carried across the room. I wanted to ask her about it. I wanted to stay quiet, both at once. The clock ticked, but time felt irrelevant. We existed in this small, charged space where the outside world had no sway. I reached over to hand her a cup of coffee, my fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. She didn't pull away, though I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes. That tiny touch, accidental, inconsequential, somehow anchored me to her entirely. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the moment passed. She turned back to her papers, tapping her pen lightly, but the tension lingered. I wanted to speak, to ask why, to reach, but all I could do was stay there, noticing every little thing about her. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. It wasn't planned, running into her again the next evening. I'd thought the night before was a one-off, a strange flicker in my routine. But there she was, leaning against the counter at the little corner bookstore she ran, the late sunlight catching the streaks of gray in her hair, making her seem older, wiser, untouchable. She didn't greet me immediately. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat, and then she looked away, scanning the shelves as if she hadn't noticed me at all. I lingered, trying not to seem obvious, but it was impossible. She moved with a kind of quiet control that demanded observation. Her hands, slender and pale, adjusted a stack of books with precision, yet her nails were chipped, as though she'd forgotten to care for herself in small, silent ways. "Long day?" I asked, finally, soft enough that she wouldn't feel cornered. Her fingers stilled mid-arrangement. She didn't answer for a moment, and that pause felt heavier than any sentence could have been. When she did speak, it was clipped, careful. Something like that. No elaboration, nothing to pull me in, and everything at once. I noticed how tired she looked, the faint dark shadows under her eyes, the slight slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was watching. And yet there was a spark. Something in the curve of her jaw, the lift of her cheekbones, the way she moved despite exhaustion. She was a contradiction, as if life had weighed her down but never quite managed to break her. I lingered nearby, pretending to browse titles, stealing glances. Every so often, she'd let her gaze brush mine, fleeting and electric, and I'd catch the subtle twitch of her lips. Not a smile, not exactly, but something softer, almost like a confession she didn't want to give. At one point, she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to me, "I can't keep up with everything." And suddenly, I wanted to help. Not with the store, not with the books, but with whatever she couldn't handle alone. I reached for a volume she had just pulled from the shelf and handed it to her. Our fingers touched again, slightly longer this time. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply met my eyes, and for a moment, the bookstore ceased to exist. Her lips pressed together. Her shoulders tightened. I could feel the unspoken barrier she kept between us. The careful distance. The walls built from years of experience, heartbreak, and pride. And yet, in that small moment, they wavered. She finally turned her attention back to the shelf, leaving me hovering in that strange limbo between familiarity and desire. I didn't leave. Couldn't. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It was late when I found myself helping her in the apartment above the bookstore. "A leaky faucet," she said, though her voice carried a hesitation I couldn't ignore. The hallway smelled faintly of damp wood, and the city's hum was muted behind closed windows. She moved ahead of me, barefoot, her steps quiet but deliberate, and I followed at a careful distance. The apartment was small, cozy, but scattered. Papers, books, a mug left too long with cold coffee. She gestured toward the sink, brushing her hair back as if to ward off the invisible weight in the room. I knelt beside the faucet, tools in hand, but I could feel her presence pressing just beyond my shoulder, warm, layered, unspoken. "You don't have to do this," she said, a little too quickly, like she wanted to retract the invitation before she even fully gave it. "I don't mind," I said, my voice low. I caught her glance in the corner of my eye, a brief flicker of vulnerability she tried to hide behind practiced composure. Her fingers traced the edge of the counter, hesitating, then letting go as if afraid to leave a mark. Time slowed. I noticed the way her neck tilted, the faint tension in her jaw, the subtle curve of her shoulders under the soft cotton of her shirt. She was near, closer than usual, and I could almost feel the heat radiating off her skin. My heart picked up, and yet my hands worked with deliberate care, focusing on the faucet, ignoring the pulse in my chest. She sighed, barely audible. "I forget how quiet it can be up here." I didn't answer. I was aware that our proximity made everything electric. The brush of an arm as she reached past me for the wrench, the accidental graze of fingers on the knob. The kind of closeness that should have been harmless, but somehow wasn't. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up quickly, glancing at the screen, and I glimpsed the name. Someone from her past. Her eyes flicked away from me, unreadable. A subtle frown, a soft tightening of her lips. External pressures, calls, obligations, history, reminding us that this moment, however charged, was fragile. The faucet finally fixed. I stood, leaning back just enough to give her space, though every instinct screamed to stay closer. She offered a small, hesitant smile, almost apologetic, and I felt my own lips twitch in response, though I didn't let it show. I took a step toward the door, ready to leave, but my hand lingered near hers as she reached for the doorknob. For a heartbeat, I imagined taking it, holding it, letting the tension between us speak in a language we both understood but couldn't name. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, "You should go now," and I did, but only my body left that room. It was raining the next evening, the kind of slow, insistent drizzle that makes streets glisten and the world feel smaller, almost intimate. I didn't plan to be there, not at her apartment, but something pulled me. The echo of her voice, the weight of that night when I'd left half a heartbeat behind. She opened the door before I knocked properly, and for a moment we just stood there, soaked from the drizzle, staring at each other. Her hair clung slightly to her face, damp strands framing her eyes, and I realized I'd never seen her like this. unguarded, not fully composed. "I wasn't expecting you," she said, though her voice had a softness, an almost apologetic note that tugged at something inside me. "I thought you might need help," I said. The words sounded clumsy, inadequate, but they were the only ones I had. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped aside, letting me in, and we moved through her apartment in silence. The usual hum of the city outside was muffled by the rain, leaving us alone with the quiet, the subtle ticking of a clock, the faint drip of water from the window sill. We ended up in the living room, each of us on opposite ends of the sofa. She stared out at the rain, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I watched her, noticing the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her shoulders were tense, the unspoken story in her posture. Finally, she spoke, quietly, almost to herself. "What are we doing?" The words hung in the air, simple yet impossible to answer. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about the uncharted territory we'd wandered into, about the tension that had been building like a storm inside her apartment and inside me. I tried to reply, but nothing felt right. I don't know," I admitted, and even that felt like too much, too little, entirely inadequate. She turned slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. There was no accusation, no expectation, just raw honesty, and the weight of unspoken truths. I could see the conflict in her gaze, the desire to reach, the instinct to retreat, the memory of battles fought long before I existed. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker, every sound magnified. The hum of the heater, the faint rustle of her sleeve, my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I wanted to say something that would make it easier, that would explain why I couldn't stop thinking about her, why my chest ached every time she spoke softly or brushed past me. But the words never came. Instead, we sat there, letting the silence carry the tension, the longing, the confusion between us. She didn't say anything else, just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. It was a quiet afternoon when she asked me to help her sort through some old boxes in the back of the bookstore. I hadn't expected anything more than dust and forgotten paperbacks, but there was a tension in the air I couldn't shake, that same delicate thread from before, only tighter now. She moved with purpose, lifting boxes with surprising strength, though I could see the strain in her hands. I knelt beside her, reaching for a stack of letters tied with faded ribbons. One slipped from the bundle, and as I handed it to her, our fingers brushed, lingering slightly longer than necessary. She hesitated, then tucked it away in a drawer without a word. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. She paused, her eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second, then flicking away. "I know," she murmured. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, a contrast to her usual composed self. I noticed the way she avoided the letters now, like touching them might open old wounds she hadn't been ready to confront. "Are these from someone?" I asked carefully, trying not to push. A faint sigh escaped her lips, and she finally looked at me, vulnerability slipping through the cracks of her usual guarded expression. "Yes, someone I lost a long time ago." The words were heavy, quiet, carrying a lifetime of memory and grief I couldn't fully understand. I didn't know what to say. My instinct was to offer comfort, but there was no grand gesture needed here, only the quiet presence of someone who cared enough to stay. She leaned back against the shelf, letting her gaze drift to the floor, and I could see the tremor in her hands, the subtle tension in her shoulders. I remembered a story she once mentioned in passing, about a photograph she kept tucked away, a reminder of someone she never got to say goodbye to. Now it all made sense. The guardedness, the hesitation, the fleeting moments of tenderness she allowed me to glimpse but never fully offered. I didn't reach for her, didn't speak, only stayed there, letting her process, letting her decide how much of the past she wanted to share. It was a strange kind of intimacy, one built not on words but on silent understanding. She took a deep breath, a sound almost like she was exhaling years of unspoken memories. "I haven't let anyone see this in years," she admitted, voice trembling slightly but steadying. "Not because I don't trust people. Just not like this." For a moment, The room felt suspended in that fragile space between confession and relief. I watched her, noticing the way her eyes softened, the faint loosening of tension in her posture. And then, finally, she met my gaze fully, without the usual hesitation, without the walls she so carefully maintained. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years, and for the first time, she looked at me without fear. It started like any other evening, but the air between us felt different, heavier, warmer, charged with an unspoken understanding. We were in the bookstore after hours, the lights dimmed, the rain outside tapping gently against the windows. I was stacking some books, but I wasn't really paying attention. She moved around the room, quietly rearranging, humming a fragment of a song I didn't recognize. She glanced at me, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no careful distance in her eyes. Just recognition, the kind that sees everything you are and accepts it anyway. My chest tightened, and I realized how long I had been holding back, how long I had been waiting for permission from her silence. I stepped closer, carefully, almost tentatively, because this felt delicate, fragile, like a vase that could shatter if handled too roughly. She didn't move away. She didn't ask me to stop. She just watched, letting the space between us shrink without comment. There was no grand confession, no declaration, nothing dramatic, just presence. I reached out, and our fingers brushed, not a spark, not a shock, but a steady warmth, a shared pulse that neither of us needed words to acknowledge. She let her hand rest in mine, lightly, and I could feel the tension of years, of fear, of restraint, begin to melt, just slightly. She leaned against the counter, her eyes soft, almost weary, but open. I leaned closer, careful, until our foreheads touched lightly, and the bookstore, the rain, the world outside faded into insignificance. In that small, quiet contact, everything was said without speaking. Her breath mingled with mine, slow and steady. I didn't push for more. She didn't pull away. That was enough. That delicate balance, that fragile connection, was enough. She let out a small sigh, barely audible, a sound that seemed to release something she had held onto for years. My heart beat faster, not from desire alone, but from the intimacy of being trusted, of being allowed into a space no one else had touched. We sat together on the floor later, backs against the shelves, hands still lightly intertwined, the soft hum of the store around us. No words, just the quiet understanding of two people who had slowly navigated their fears, their pasts, and found something real in each other. I looked at her, noticing the small details, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the faint smile tugging at her lips, the way her eyes reflected the soft lamplight. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fairy tale love, but it was honest, earned, and ours. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down, and that was louder than any "I love you" ever could be. Strange, looking back now, how something that started as an unexpected whisper in the middle of the night could quietly reshape everything. I think about her often. The way she moved, the pauses between her words, the way her hands held stories she never spoke aloud. The bookstore feels different now, though everything looks the same. The dim light catches dust motes that float lazily. The shelves sag slightly with the weight of unread books, and the soft hum of the city outside is a constant reminder that life keeps moving. But in that quiet, I can still feel her presence beside me, even when she's not there. She taught me how subtle a connection could be, how the smallest gestures, the fleeting touches, and the silences that spoke louder than words could hold more meaning than anything else in the world. I've learned that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the rhythm of shared breaths, in the comfort of sitting together, knowing that neither of you has to fill the space with anything more than presence. I've changed too. I notice things now, the way people hesitate before speaking, the small, telling gestures, the invisible walls we carry. I understand patience differently, how to wait without pressure, how to honor someone's pace while still being present. She changed me without trying, simply by being who she was, in all her complexity, vulnerability, and strength. We still share moments that are delicate, like balancing on the edge of something dangerous and beautiful. There are mornings when I watch her laugh over coffee, afternoons when she brushes past me, just close enough for me to feel the warmth, and evenings when the silence between us is enough. There's no dramatic confession, no need for perfection, just quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding that what we have is rare and fragile, but entirely real. I didn't just fall for an older woman. I fell into something rare, something true, a connection that was earned slowly, quietly, and with intention, something that cannot be replicated or rushed. And I hope, if you're listening, you find something like that too. Life moves forward. The rain falls, the clocks tick, and the world insists on its noise. But the moments that matter are the ones we carry silently, tucked into the spaces between words, in the subtle touches, in the glances that linger just long enough to make the heart remember. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?